Welcome back. Gauteng Premier and former Education MEC Panyaza Lesufi's call for one examination for all matriculants in South Africa has sparked a debate on the future of the education system. ActionSA believes that Lesufi is attempting to distract the public from the continued failures of the country's public schooling system. For more on this, we're joined by Angela Sobey from ActionSA and Dean of Education at Stellenbosch University, Professor Mbulungeni. Madiba. Angela, thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you so much for having us this afternoon, Clement.
Prof, thank you so much for also joining this conversation.
No, thanks so much, Clement, for inviting us, and thanks so much, and greetings to your viewers.
Yeah, I'll start with you, Angela. As ActionSA, why were you taken aback by the statement by the Premier?
The Premier tends to be quite populist in what he does around. From the time he was the Education MEC, he tends to be quite populist in his actions and tends to want to be seen as addressing things. The call to scrap the IEB exam is actually, it's again another populist ploy, because he's wanting to fix something that is not broken. There are a myriad challenges in education, Clement, that do need addressing, that do need fixing. And there's monies that are unaccounted for under his tenure as Premier of Education, the MEC of Education in Gauteng, that are unaccounted for. You've got a school that was built on a wetland that cannot be used practically. You've got the millions that were spent on sanitizing empty classrooms. And we are currently still sitting with schools that do not have backup systems in terms of load shedding, where education gets disrupted. When there is no electricity and there is no water at schools, learners have to go home. So instead of wanting to tackle the IEB, which is a creation of the failed education system, by the way, because the IEB is something that has consistently delivered a higher pass rate than the National Senior Certificate exam. So to want to fix that rather than going to fix what is wrong with education is just purely opportunistic. We do understand that we are at electioneering time and people do want to be relevant, but I think that it's high time that South Africans are not insulted like this, where our attention is diverted to a shiny coin and we must go after what seems to be popular rather than what is actually wrong. There are way too many learners, and if you look at the current state of everything that's wrong with education, we are still having learners that are drowning in pit latrines. We're still having learners drowning in rivers trying to make their way to school. Start learning under trees, learning in prefabricated classrooms, in prefab buildings. And instead of us fixing that, we are going after something that is not broken. Yeah. So if you look at the majority of children that are affected by these challenges I've just mentioned, these are black learners. If you go into the townships, you'll see that there are so many transport shuttles shuttling children out of township schools into suburban schools and areas that are supposed to be better, instead of us fixing education and making educational environments conducive to learning for our children.
Yeah. Prof, do you think, in your view, it would be fair for private and public schools to compete in, suppose, one examination room when the different schools are so differently resourced?
Yeah, look, I think we really need to unpack the argument that Mr. Lesufi is putting forward. I'm an academic. From my perspective, I think it's something that we really need to begin to talk about it, especially when you look at where IEB emerged in 1992, and of course the introduction of the National Senior Certificate. So these two systems, they were born within a political context of South Africa, transitioning to democracy and so on and so on. So when the NSC was introduced, I think there was this view that it's going to deliver inferior education, it's going to lower the standard and so on and so on. And we do understand, when the curriculum was introduced, the OBE, the struggles around OBE and so on. So there were teething problems that came up with the National Senior Certificate. So that's a reality. But the question is, if we look back, how the curriculum has progressed, how far apart really in terms of assessing, because it's one curriculum, we don't have two curriculum. We have got one national curriculum that we have, which the private sector is implementing, and with the national system. So curriculum is one of the same thing. But how do you assess that curriculum? So the assessment that IEB was doing, which is, of course, it was in terms of assessing high quality, high standards, which is there, and the NEC, which started very low. I know it's indicated some other time that people doubted, whether it's really assessing the real skills. Mm-hmm. You remember we also introduced the national benchmarking tests, which were aimed at assessing the competencies that the learners are coming to university with. But where we are now, for example, with a national benchmarking test, we have realized that the national senior certificates, where it is now, it is able to predict the competencies that learners want, in higher education. Mm. Now the question is, if national senior certificate has stabilized now and is able to predict the competencies that learners have, and at the same time we had a system of assessment, the IEB, which was really established to maintain the standards, in fear of dropping standards that can really be brought by the new system. So these two assessment systems have now moved very close to each other, in such a way that when learners come to my faculty at Stellenbosch, I don't even think, whether they are coming from IEB, whether they are coming from the National Senior Certificate. They bring competencies that really matches the minimum requirement of the program. Mm. So I think I really agree with Mr. Lesufi that we need to open a conversation. Do we need two assessment systems, or we might really begin to say, hey, let's come up with one national assessment system rather than having two? There are political issues that come with the two systems, of course, that I think Angela is raising. There are politics around that, elitism that goes with the IEB, which in reality, we as educators, we don't see it that way. We only want to see students coming to our institutions well prepared with the relevant competencies.
Mm-hmm. Angela, what do you think are some of the key priority areas to fix first? Because the reality, I don't think the Premier can argue with that too, is that the quality is different as well from the IEB schools, from public schools as well. There's issues you need to talk about. Even the teachers and how skilled they are when you look at quintile 1 to 3 schools, for instance. How can government go about fixing those issues before we even have this kind of conversation?
Clement, the challenges are many. And if we were just to focus it on education, within education, we need to depoliticize education. Education needs to be run by educators, and the administrators need to be left to do their job. Politicians need to step out of the administration of it. You cannot have politicians stepping into positions within schools and wanting to have cadre deployment and so on, because this is why we are sitting with teachers that cannot write the exams that they teach the very students that they're supposed to be preparing for. So the depoliticization of education, we're looking at ensuring that teachers are upskilled and that they are fit for purpose placements, that qualified educators are brought in, and where they are not qualified, that they are retrained. We want to bring back teacher training colleges. We want to make sure that the entire system is designed in a way that our learners finish school with a real chance at life, that they actually learn skills beyond just the academic skills, that they are able to qualify from school. We want to stop the undue interference, even by the unions in the educational system. We want to reintroduce in high school vocational subjects, because not everyone is gifted in sports, not everyone is gifted academically, and just allowing everyone to be good at what they are naturally good at. So we're wanting to ensure that the education system is an environment that is conducive to learning, rather than one that is conducive, where kids are threatened, where there's bullying, where there's all sorts of things, and also that there's collaboration in terms of the broader society to ensure that issues that come and impact the child at school are addressed at a more holistic level. But basically, we're wanting education to be a system where we are not going to skew the playing field. We want the playing field to be level, but we want to bring our learners up to that standard. Dropping the pass rate, it affects mostly children that are writing the NSC exam, not the IAB exams, which is why the IAB invests more. It's like having medical aid and having the choice to go to a public hospital and bleed to death because there are no resources versus a private hospital. You've got that choice. Similarly, if you've got the money, and I was using the example earlier, Clement, of parents that would spend on transport and school fees and cart their children out of the townships. There are schools that we've discovered in the townships that are run by passionate educators that are doing their best and that are really well run. But this needs to be the standard in the townships. Children need to get back to being children, where school is a safe environment, where they can learn, where they can thrive, where their minds can be opened, where they can excel at sport or whatever it is that they are good at. I mean, one of the promises that South Africans were made in 1994 was that in fact, not even 1994, way back when the Bill of Rights was introduced, was that the doors of learning and culture shall be open, because you cannot have one without the other. Children need to know who they are, where they come from, and take ownership of that. And when they are educated, they're able to be quite proud. If you look at the moments as South Africans that have united us, they've united us around sports, around culture, around those kind of things, where we've transcended our cultural and racial differences. And you know, we want to be able to take our country back to that. We want to ensure that education, especially when you look at the entire education system, your basic education, we're currently celebrating the resilience of these learners. Having overcome COVID, having overcome missing 2 years of school, this class of 2023 went into high school in 2019. By 2020, 2021, they went in grade 8 into high school, and they came back in grade 10, going on grade 11. They missed an entire chunk of high school. And even those that were trying to learn at home, the Department of Education did not put enough resources into ensuring that we were ready for online learning and the support that was needed.
Yeah, Prof, in the bigger scheme of things, what difference will be made by IEB and also students from public institutions coming and sitting for one exam? There are some critics of the Premier who believe that this is just a ploy by a government that wants to take credit for the work that they have not done. Because if you have IEB students, NSC students sitting for one exam, we're just going to have one pass rate, and government then takes credit for actually what other parents have invested in sending their kids to private school because they feel the quality in public school is not on par.
Yeah, Clement, you see there's a lot of confusion here. Remember, there are private schools that also write a national senior certificate. There are public schools that also take IEB. So the situation is becoming very, very blurred now, rather than before. You are having schools across that are doing that. Because usually it's really where learners find themselves in. So what we should be talking about it's how do we implement the national curriculum. With the national curriculum that we have, IEB is implementing the same curriculum. Now the difference comes here. IEB, these are private colleges. They have got resources, small classes. They've got well-qualified teachers, so they are able to drive this curriculum. They are able to implement it. And they are also to draw key competencies. For example, critical thinking, problem solving. So they are able to bring those competencies out. And yet, the National Senior Certificate, although, it's based on the same curriculum, because of many, many other factors, of course, some of them due to government failures and so on, you find that we are still more content-based. Some of the critical competencies that are needed, critical competencies of the skills for the 21st century, critical thinking, problem solving, all those kind of skills which IEB is implementing using the same curriculum, they are not being implemented. So I think we should adopt a two-pronged approach in this discussion. How do we improve our curriculum, the implementation of our curriculum, in such a way that we are able to develop those critical skills rather than content only, which IEB is already there. So I think if we are to bring the two systems together, it's not a question of now you are going to phase out IEB. It's a question of saying, let's see now we've got a national curriculum. How do we really assess this curriculum in a way that we assess the critical skills? Because that's what the certificate, senior certificate, it's not assessing. Some of them, the way that is being assessed in IEB. So if you put these two learners together, one IEB, one AC in one class, if they were not prepared to say same way, they are not going to really to cope. The one from national senior certificates are not going to answer.
But that's precisely the point. Isn't that precisely
the IEB?
Isn't that precisely the point? That even if they're using the same curriculum, the depth of knowledge is different, right?
It's different, yeah.
It is. So how fair then is it to want to suggest that let's bring them then in one? Because competitively, you cannot even compare when you look at the resources that particularly quintile 1 to 3 schools have, and you look at the resources that IEB schools have. They are vastly different. There's a big margin there. So it's unfair essentially to even want to sit both of these two categories in one.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that the discussion should also be focused on how you implement your curriculum in a way that you are able to develop the critical skills. The curriculum is the same.
Okay.
Assessing, you cannot assess a different construct. The IEB has got a particular construct that they're assessing, advanced competencies which they are assessing. And we have realized, I think the national system has also, the NC has realized that we are not assessing some of the critical skills that are needed. So I think there's a lot to learn from the IEB. But at the same time, when it comes to diversity, because that's another criticism of the IEB, it's elitist, it's true. Not much enough diversity there. But how learners learn, like we were saying, learners cope with COVID, staying in shacks. How learners learn, develop skills in a poor resourced environment and so on and so on. I think colleges from IEB will also learn a lot from how the general public are doing, the kids from poor backgrounds are making it.
Okay.
So I think the two systems can learn from each other and maybe come up with a midway.
All right. Unfortunately, we're so out of time. Professor Mbulu Madisa and Angela Sobey, thank you to both of you for making time for us.